Frogman Friday.
Yeah, boy. What's up, guys? It's that time again. Welcome to the Frogman Friday Show.
Presented by Transcend, the best peptide and hormone therapy. They put your health first so you can live more and worry less. Go to transcendcompany.com/Birdman to begin your wellness transformation today.
Today, our badass guest is Karl Gustavson, aka Gus. Navy SEAL, 22 years of service, senior chief retired, public speaker, a certified full send badass, and a director of operations for Community First Project. You can catch him on IG and LinkedIn, and to take a deeper dive, go check out c1p.org. Brother, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
So good to see you. And to tell everybody, this is so cool. So we just recently linked up, and Karl and I went to Buds together. He actually was in the class before me, but we linked up in class 245 and went through primarily all of the three phases together. And it's been so long. We saw each other very quickly during our career after that, but it's been since 2003 that we've actually hung out and really had a good time together. So it's really cool to relive some of those non-war stories of Buds and talk about really me screwing everything up. So it's just really cool. So there's our connection right there. Before we dive into all that you've got going on post-service, I really want to talk more about what is your transition like? Because, you know, you've done a full career. 22 years is a lot in the special operations community, especially where you served. So what did transition look like for you?
Just like I think for anybody who's leaving a community that they've been part of for such a long time, the transition always comes with a little bit of trepidation. What's going to be next? You know, am I going to lose the community? Am I going to lose that sense of belonging? Am I going to lose part of my identity? For me, the transition really looked a lot like reaching out to people that within the community who had preceded me in retirement and asking them kind of like, what are you doing? What things are you involved in? And looking around and seeing, you know, what's out there that I feel like I knew that I wanted the mission to continue, if that makes sense. I knew that I wanted to continue doing something that felt like I was contributing to a greater cause. And so for me, you know, a couple of things popped up on my radar and I decided to pursue, in particular, Community First Project. But I knew, number one, I knew I wanted to stay busy. Number two, I knew I wanted to stay somewhat in the tactical realm. I wanted to continue training. I wanted to continue being on the range and being around, you know, a brotherhood, even though it wasn't going to be exactly the same brotherhood.
Yeah.
And then in the midst of all that, also, I have an uncle who owns a consultancy and works with a number of businesses, and he invited me to come speak to some of the businesses he worked with, which was sort of the genesis of the public speaking and stuff that I do. So found some things that were interesting to me, intriguing, keep me engaged, keep my mind sharp, keep my tactical skills sharp, and keep contributing to a greater cause. And that's really what I wanted to do.
It's really nice to hear that transition for you was, you know, it was thought out, but it was also like kind of, you know, you inchworm your way into it without stressing and derailing, because we have a lot of that, myself included. It's very difficult to get out and, you know, figure out what your next Navy SEAL thing is going to be, you know, your next apex, because guys like you are not those kind of guys who go into a very low level, nice and relaxed, kosher place afterwards. You're still operating at such a high level, and I don't necessarily think that we notice that we're operating at that level because you're around the same type of people. Yeah. And I always make this joke with guys when they were like, anybody says to me like, wow, you're a Navy SEAL. And I was like, it's kind of funny. It's a title. But when you're with the teams, you look at your buddy to your left, your right, like, hey, guess what, dude? I'm a Navy SEAL. And they're like, yeah, so am I. You're like, okay, cool. You know, it's like nothing. So, but it is something.
You know, in Virginia Beach, and because the SEAL teams, for people who don't know, are only primarily really located in two places, right? And that's Virginia Beach and Coronado. And so in those communities, it doesn't even feel unique. You come out to Virginia Beach and you tell people you're a SEAL, and they're like, so? Everybody is here. Half of my neighbors, the people that, you know, their kids go to school with my kids, they're all SEALs. And, you know, Coronado or San Diego, that the same kind of deal. But then I go home to Colorado and people, you know, people are like, oh my gosh, you're a retired SEAL. That's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
So it is, like you said, it's about the company you keep. You know what I mean? It's more impressive to some people than to others.
There was a point in time in California where you'd be in a bar or something, and you'd be talking to somebody, and like, so are you in the military? And you're like, yeah. And they're like, ugh. You're like, what? Like, seriously?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a whole nother story for another time. So, this is really intriguing to me is we're so used to operating in the dark, away from everybody. You stay away from reporters. We don't tell our story. And a lot of guys get out and have gotten into this world of going from being introverts to being extroverted, talking on stage, being speakers. And I find it so fascinating because I grew up being so terrified to talk in front of public. It was just so difficult for me. And even when I do it to this day, I still get super nervous because it's just not the natural for me. Mm-hmm. Have you always been comfortable in front of a crowd, or how did you kind of roll into, I know that you said your uncle, but how did you pull the trigger on doing that? And then kind of give us some of your focal points of speaking.
So a couple of things. I think the very beginning, the foundational underlying thing with public speaking happened before I ever came into the teams. Right out of high school, I went to Brazil and I worked for 2 years as a missionary in Brazil. And so not only does that involve a lot of public speaking, but it also involves public speaking in another language that for the first probably 4 or 5 months that I lived in Brazil, I wasn't proficient at Portuguese. So, we would go to to the church or to a public square or to a park, and we would be, preaching, teaching our message in a language that I don't speak. And so you have to get over a lot of fears pretty quickly, or you're just not going to be a very good, very effective missionary. Fast forward to my time in the teams, even as a junior guy, and I'm sure you know this from your time as well, there's an accelerated rate of expectation for what the leadership expects you to be able to do as an E5 and E6 is above and beyond what the regular Navy expects petty officers second and third class to do, when they're coming up. So for me as an E5, I'm already briefing admirals and generals. We're covering, certain programs, and I'm having to speak to these people who are at a much, much higher level than where we're at. And you have to get comfortable in these audiences that can be very demanding at times. And then to a lesser extent, briefing your own team, or even things like, giving the safety brief, giving the RSO brief, and getting out there, and you're in front of a crowd of people who are high performers, and they're looking at you, and it's all eyes on you, and you kind of have to acclimate to that idea. So as I transitioned out of the Navy, I already had a little bit of a background, so I wasn't super uncomfortable being in front of people. But in the corporate public speaking world, the difference is I had to take the things that we learn as SEALs and make them applicable to the audience that was listening to me. And that can be a challenge, I think, for guys, because it's not just getting up there and telling stories, or we did this thing or that thing, or, here's why SEALs are cool. Like, people already have a good idea of that stuff. It's about taking the individual principles and applying those to business or to whatever the audience is that you're talking to, and make it something that's relatable, that they can learn from it, that they can take actionable learning points away. And that can be a challenge. So that's something I've been trying to sort of hone my craft as far as that's concerned.
That's amazing, man. I was asked to give a speech to a corporation one time, and they said, can you pull out some of the skill set you learned when you're, so I was like, great, let's rewind real quick. I did 8 years in, so I didn't do a whole career to like pull all the knowledge out, but I said, let me think about, some of my mentors and some words of wisdom they gave me. And so I was like, I'm going to throw a fast one on you guys. If you want your company to operate at the highest level, you guys should implement peer evals. And he was like, what is that? And I'm like, this is something that we do in SEAL training where all the students have to peer eval. They have to give evals on everybody in the class to see where you rank. And that exposes a lot. And so I was like, if you did this, then people would change their ways, because they would know that their peers now feel that they're not performing to the highest level. Not one company that I've talked to has ever implemented that. So I'm probably the worst public speaker ever, but at least I've tried,
It's funny, and without even us having discussed that is one thing that I always suggest is get feedback from the peers. Because if you get feedback from the leadership, typically if there's a leader around, the employees are they're putting their best foot forward. They're showing the best side of themselves. The leadership is here. Let's put on a front. Let's work hard. Let's look busy. But where the rubber meets the road is really when there's no leadership around, there's no authority figure that's looking at you. What are you doing then? When it's just you and your peers? Are you screwing around? Are you shirking work? Are you, on Facebook instead of sending out emails, or get feedback from the person who works most closely with those people. And I say the same thing to corporations. I'm like, if you are not getting peer evaluation from your employees, you're missing a huge segment of what you're not seeing as the leader.
That's totally agreed, man. Well, I got some companies I'm going to send you to. If people, well, before we even get to that, so your focus point to corporations is converting what you've learned in the special operations community to business and to leadership so that they can actually, change the dynamic, make themselves more functional. Is that your typical focus, or you do some motivational speaking, public speaking as well?
Yeah, so motivational speaking, public speaking, I talk about building high performing teams. I talk about recruiting and maintaining talent, and then to a lesser extent, but I have worked with a couple of veteran nonprofits like Boot Campaign, All Secure Foundation, and a couple of other different ones. Just doing speaking about talking about mental health and the emotionality of transitioning out of high performing organizations, and everything from how that affects relationships, personal relationships, to how it affects veteran mental health, and the things that we can do, or the things that I've tried to employ myself to make that transition a little bit easier. And certainly I think everybody who's a veteran recognizes there's a certain percentage of the veteran population who is suffering the invisible wounds of war. And so some of that public speaking that I do is in an effort to help out those organizations like Boot Campaign and Tom and Jen Satterley over at the All Secure Foundation, and helping get their message out and helping give my thoughts on what's helped me navigate some of those challenges.
How do people get a hold of you to hire you?
So a lot of it up until this point has either just been via social media. So people will reach out on Instagram. They'll see that I've spoken to a different, or to a company or to a nonprofit, or has been referral. Somebody that I've worked with on one event will give my number or say, hey, there's this person I think you might be interested in talking to. Let me connect you via a text thread. And so that keeps it a more limited and manageable scope from my end, because obviously the public speaking only fits into my schedule where I'm not doing law enforcement training for Community First. So it's kind of catch as catch can there. So if I can do, one or two in a month, that's manageable for me.
That's awesome. All right, we'll blast your handles out there. So
Awesome.
Anybody who's looking for a badass public speaker, because I know Karl, he's badass. He far exceeded, let's just put it this way, of the amount of guys that went through our Buds class, there were some that went to higher levels within the organization, and most of us did not. And so you're tip of the spear, man. And so,
Thank you.
Yeah, everybody, you can hire him, and I'll push some guys your way as well.
Appreciate it.
Let's dig into this Community First project. So we've had Sully on the show to talk about founding the organization, the charity, but we'll reemphasize it. You're the director of operations. So before we even get into Community First project, what do you do for the organization?
So I dual hat. The first thing when I came on with Sully, and as I was transitioning out of the Navy, Sully reached out to me, and I knew what he was doing with Community First Project, and I had done some training with law enforcement while I was active duty. But he reached out and he said, hey, we've trained some law enforcement, some police departments together while we were active. Would you want to come continue that mission with me in my nonprofit? And I talked to him about it, and I said, yeah, that sounds like something I'd be interested in. It's a mission that I firmly believe in, for sure. And so wanting to come on board. And then after about the first 5 months with Community First Project, he said, hey, would you want to take over this position as director of operations? So we kind of covered the scope of that. And mostly what I do is split time between actually being there at the trainings, doing the boots on the ground with the law enforcement, running them through our scenarios, giving them the tactics. And then in the rest of the time, I'm coordinating with departments that are reaching out to Community First Project that want training, people who have seen us and are curious about what we do, or departments that they recognize they have insufficient training up until now, and so they would like to bring us over and be able to train with them. So I manage that from the email side and the coordination side, and some of it is just getting out our name and who we are and getting the message out about what we're doing. And the really unique thing about Community First Project, is that we source donations to pay for the funding that we provide to law enforcement. So it comes at no cost to the departments. So explaining that to people sometimes makes heads explode, because people are like, so no cost to the department. So you're going to come train us for free based on donations that you've been able to get leading up to that. And, we're like, yeah, that's exactly the point. It's because a lot of these departments don't have the funding to pay for that training themselves. So, that's primarily my main functions are that coordination, setting up the future training, being a liaison between Community First Project and departments that are interested in training with us, and then also going to these places and training the cops that are there. For example, in a week from now, the very end of this month, beginning of May, we'll be up in Hartford, Connecticut, training the department up there.
Check. So how long is the curriculum for a group, and what is the typical group? Is this, standard patrol PT or PD? Is this SWAT? I mean, who is your genre, and what does the curriculum look like?
So primarily what we're focused on is training the patrol level officers. So when Sully stood up, we stood up First Blue Force Strategies, which was a for-profit organization to train law enforcement that had the money to pay for it. What he quickly recognized was that SWAT teams have the money, they have the manning, they have the equipment, they have the time, but the patrol level officers, who tend to be the first responders to active shooter or high risk, high threat scenarios, don't have that training, right? They're pretty catastrophically undertrained. In fact, most departments, they get about 12 to 15 hours of range time and additional training time in a year. So we recognize that. We recognize there is not a robust funding mechanism for those folks to hire former Tier 1 operators to come out and do the training for them. So primarily what we're focused on is the patrol level officers and the people who are, in our assessment, going to be the first people on scene in case of a catastrophic incident or an active shooter type situation. Sometimes that looks like part-time SWAT. Sometimes, like in the case of Fort Worth, we were just down there and we worked with part patrol and part their directed response unit, which is like sort of a semi-SWAT team. But our primary focus is to get the training into the hands of the people who are, most undertrained. So the patrol level officer types.
How long is the curriculum usually?
So we do a week. We do 5 days. So 40 hours would be our curriculum. And in an ideal situation, we would circle back with those departments in 6 months or a year. Right now, the way the funding is, we're kind of one and done, with the hope that down the road we'll be able to fundraise enough to circle back with those departments we've already worked with and get in some additional training.
Got it. Okay. So a week, 40-hour comprehensive course for, like you said, groups that don't get a ton of training and don't have big budgets, and it comes free at cost to them. And anybody can go donate in the country.
Yeah, if you want to donate, go to c1p.org, and there are links there to donate. We usually a few times a year we run big fundraisers, and we bring in high net worth individuals, and that provides a lot of the funding. But every little bit counts, and if there's people out there that feel it on their hearts to donate to a good cause, the training law enforcement and keeping our community safe. I mean, it's right there in the name, right? Community first. So yeah. We're, I know my whole family's out in Colorado, which has unfortunately been the recipient of some of the worst active shooter type tragedies in our country's history. The Aurora theater shooter and, Columbine right back in 1999, shortly after I graduated high school. And so when I think about training law enforcement, it hits home for me. I have 14 nieces and nephews. They all live out in Colorado. They're all in middle school or high school. So it's near and dear to my heart to be able to train law enforcement to respond effectively and efficiently to those kind of situations.
You're right. It's when we get out, this is something that shocked me is when I got out of the service, I started hanging out with law enforcement guys. They wanted to know about my career, and I didn't know much about their career. But when I started to realize the lack of training that they had and the questions they were asking were very, very novice or nominal, mm-hmm. and then finding out that their budgets weren't there, it's like, wow, these are the guys that I always put on this pedestal as saying, these guys got it covered for me. Like outside of my house, they've got it handled. And it's not their own fault. It's just the mechanism that they're underfunded, don't get enough training time. want to, just don't get it. And so now bringing in a group of tier 1 operators to train them to a level that they would never, ever get on their normal trajectory in their career is a humongous step forward. So donations are welcome. And if you can find it in your hearts to donate to c1p.org or Community First Project, we would greatly appreciate it. With that being said, what other things do you need help with? Do you guys find your own training centers? Do you typically liaise with the law enforcement agency to find those training sites? Are there volunteer possibilities? What else do you need help with?
Yeah, so most of the training sites, in the places that we go, either they have buildings in those municipalities that aren't being used, and the law enforcement will typically have access to those, and we'll train there. In the case of, Fort Worth and some of the other bigger police departments or better funded police departments, sometimes they have training centers that we can actually go in and use those training centers. Ideally, the long-term vision for Community First Project is we would like to build our own organic training centers. If we can get the funding, we'd like to have one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and then, maybe one central and one mountain, that folks can come from the outside, and the departments that are close to those training centers would be able to come and use those facilities and train with us. And that would sort of just make the process even easier. So that's probably more like a 5-year outlook for what we'd like to do. But again, it all starts with the fundraising. It all starts with how much money do we have, how much time do we have, and how many people do we have available to train these law enforcement departments that are reaching out and asking. And unfortunately, right now, we have to turn away about 80% of the departments that reach out to us because we don't have the funding and we don't have the time. But as we go forward, we're bringing more people on board. We'd like to bring more people who are salaried full time, and that all starts with fundraising.
Sure. It's very interesting. I love the idea of having like a battle space in each location, north, south, east, and west, to have your own center that you can always have. And you can also be training multiple at the same time, which is super cool. Okay, so funding, let's go back to that for a second. We get donations in, but tell me, do you have a gala? Do you have specific events that people can actually come to or get behind? What do we got there?
Yeah, we do. We do a number of different events. Right now, we're fortunate to have a couple of people that work pretty much exclusively. They're affiliated only. They're not salaried or anything. They're affiliated only because they want to be affiliated, and they do a lot of our fundraising. So primarily, we've been having fundraising events up in Boston or Nantucket area. Sully's from Massachusetts, so a lot of his connections are there, and that's where we've been doing most of those things. Right now, we're looking to expand because obviously the fundraising that we do typically pays for the training in the areas that we do the fundraising. People who donate in those areas want to see the money go to train law enforcement in their communities. So I'm sort of heading up the project of starting to do fundraisers, galas, events in Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, so that we can push our training out further west. Typically we haven't been further west than Texas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I think we have a training that's coming up in Midland as well. So that'll be about as far west as we've gone. But yeah, we want to start doing fundraising further and further west. We're going to start doing some stuff out in LA. We want to start doing some stuff in Colorado. And so we're right now looking for people to underwrite or potentially help us set up fundraisers in those areas. So if people are event organizers, event planners, and would be willing to take their time and donate their time and effort to help us set up those events, that'd be fantastic too.
Check. All right. Good to know. The fundraising side aside, as volunteer, is there any volunteerism that you guys need help with, or is this purely just operator to law enforcement?
Yeah, it's pretty much just operator to law enforcement on the training side. We've had a few people reach out and say that they want to support. In fact, we just established a partnership with a veteran-owned shoe company called Woobies that makes like a tactical type shoe. And their mission started off being, they would sell a pair of shoes, and for every one sold, they would give one to a homeless veteran, and that was their company mission. Fantastic company. The owner's a guy named Mason Hamlet. He's a personal friend of mine. And so we partnered with them, and in selling those shoes now, a percentage of the sales gets a kickback to Community First Project as well. So another fundraising mechanism, also a way to get good veteran-owned tactical, pretty cool looking, very comfortable footwear into people's hands. And so we're hoping that that partnership, yields some good productivity going forward. And so, yeah, there's a ton of opportunity, I think, for us to partner with different businesses, different similar mission mindset oriented type folks. And, whether that's just getting good products into people's hands, whether it's community first project swag, whether it's Whoopee shoes or, AK leather, which is another partnership that we have here locally, a gal named Ashton Keeley, who does tremendous leather work. And so it's really just getting visibility on those people and the products that they're making, and then having that help us fundraise for Community First Project.
Got it. And you said 100% that you go after donations so that the agency does not have to pay $1 for training.
Yeah, that's right. So the departments that we work with, all of the training comes at no cost to their department. And that's essentially, what we wanted to do was remove any hurdle that they were going to have towards getting the training that they need. So, we fly the instructors out there, hotels, rental cars, the whole deal, 5 days of training, our food, all of that is paid for by Community First Project, and the department comes nothing out of pocket to them. And, really for us, I see law enforcement doing domestically what I spent 22 years trying to do overseas, which is keep our country, keep our nation, keep our community safe. And so for me, the mission that they have is super, super important. And it means the world to me. So if there's a way that we can get these people the training that they need, that's going to make their community safer, that's going to keep them safe at no cost to them and remove those hurdles, then that's something that's worth doing.
That's legit. That is legit. About how many guys do you have on cadre that actually come out for these instructions?
So right now we have, I think we've had about 14 or 16 former Tier 1 operators come and work, and we just 1099 contract guys that come over and work with us. Sully and I are the only two former operators that are salaried with Community First Project. So everybody else is just, we reach out to former teammates of ours and see if they're available, and if they are, they come and train.
That's awesome. That is awesome, man. Well, since meeting Sully and going through this initially a few podcasts ago, I was really riveted by this, because there's a lot of organizations that are supporting Back the Blue and support the law enforcement families who have lost a loved one, trying to help soldiers been injured, police officers been injured. And then you're starting to see these companies that are going out there training law enforcement, but a lot of them are training civilians, and they kind of mishmashed, where you guys are a nonprofit solely based on proper training for our law enforcement. And to reemphasize again, taking the highest level of the special operations community and bringing them to train the least amount of trained police officers, to bring them up to a level that they never were going to get in their career. It's such a need. We have so many issues in this country right now with safety and security and national security. So I can't think of a better organization that supports law enforcement that actually does some tangible stuff, man. Should be proud of what you guys are building here.
We are, for sure. And, there's a number of other organizations, for-profit organizations, that do train law enforcement. And then, like I said, Sully and I, when we were active duty, when we had time, we would train law enforcement agencies in the cities and towns that we went to do our training exercises. So at the end of a week of training for the command, we would get together the law enforcement folks that had helped us out, and we would give them, an afternoon of training, running them through the scenarios that we ran through. And it was always very rewarding to me. So the fact that I get to do that now full time as a job, and get to meet, our nation's law enforcement really in all of these different places, Texas and Colorado and, Utah and Massachusetts and Florida and North Carolina and all these different places. And they are such a phenomenal group of people that, have volunteered to keep our community safe. And I think we really owe them a debt of gratitude. And so it's very rewarding to be able to do that. And, we get to come across people like, we have sort of a partnership with the Jorge Pastor Foundation, which was started by a gal named Kim Pastor, whose husband was killed in the line of duty in Austin, Texas a few years ago. And they're another foundation that, recognizes the need for our law enforcement to be better funded, better supported, better trained, better equipped. And so Kim Pastor, phenomenal human being, and unfortunately lost her husband Jorge. But she, in the aftermath of that, was able to start a nonprofit, the Jorge Pastor Foundation, which is out there again doing a very similar work, kind of hand in hand with what we do at Community First Project.
Doesn't sound since you joined the military up till present day, it doesn't sound to me like you've ever had a job. It sounds to me like you've just really had a mission, and it's been so rad that it's like easy to go to what you would call work every day. It's pretty awesome, dude.
Yeah. I mean, part of my career, the part that for some reason, even after 22 years in the SEAL teams, everybody still wants to talk about buds. But the part of my career that was so defining and going through buds, I mean, we shared those moments together. So you know how it is. It's if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I can really say that for the 22 years that I was in the SEAL teams, I woke up every day and I was happy to go, I get to go hang out with my friends. I get to go shooting at the range. I get to go jump out of airplanes. I get to scuba dive and skydive and drive cars and shoot guns. And, now to a lesser extent, I get to continue doing some of that. And then also hopefully, giving back in some aspect, whether that's on the, nonprofit veteran rehabilitation programs or whether it's, training cops with Community First Project.
What I found interesting is being an operator and going through instruction is one thing where you try to hone in your skill sets, but you don't actually become, my personal opinion, the apex of that until you start instructing it. For some reason, like when I started teaching is when I really started to, it all started to mesh together, where I felt like I was really honing in my skill sets of like doing different types of entries and just the skill sets with tactics and that. So I can't even imagine what kind of operator you are these days, but this is why I'm not getting called to be an instructor for you guys. So it's all good. I won't take any offense to that.
We'd love to have you come out. We'd love to have you come out, observe, guest instruct, hang out with us, all those things. And, and I think you're absolutely right. It's that model of learn one, do one, teach one, right? You don't truly have mastery of a skill until you can teach it.
Right. That's right. But what he's saying, folks, is that every team needs a mascot, and therefore I was just invited. Just saying. Okay.
Love to have you be our mascot too, but I mean, get on the floor, come instruct with us. And for me, there's something about being in that role and being able to be an instructor again. And even though it's not with the SEAL teams, it's with law enforcement, but it's like, there's something about that that's very connective. It's I feel like very fulfilling. It's like, I feel like I get to be an operator again to a lesser extent, but I get to go out there and put some kit on and have a gun in my hand, and be thinking dynamically and tactically. And it's, I think, I don't really know how to say it other than that it's sort of mentally feels like I'm still in the game. I'm still engaged. It feels like I didn't leave the community so far behind because I'm still kind of there with them. Yeah,
man. Well, I mean, putting on the gear, suiting up with your brothers, doesn't matter if you're going to war or if you're going to training or if you're going to train law enforcement, like suiting up with your brothers, that's the spirit right there. And, to a lesser degree, when I got out and I started base jumping, you put on your wingsuit or whatever, and you put on your base rig and you get all these things set up and you're just going through your processes. And then you're like looking at your buddies next to you and they've all got the same stuff on and you're like, oh yeah, feels good. Feels real good.
So. No, that's right. Same thing with skydiving. Anytime I go out to skydive Suffolk or whatever, you get up in the plane, you get up to altitude, you're fist bumping all the guys, you're getting ready to go out. It's that same sense of like, even though it's a different community, but it's still, it's still community.
Yeah, man. Community First Project. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, bro. Well, I'll tell you what, I like to flip the script on everyone on this one, and it seems to throw everybody for a loop. But I always ask this one question because I think it's super pinnacle to kind of show some of the drivers of your life. Who is your hero and why?
Oh, man. That's a good question. Well, I'll tell you one, since I feel like it's relevant to this whole situation with me training law enforcement. So years and years ago, let's take it all the way back to 1991, maybe 92. I had a cousin, the oldest of my cousins, had joined the Marine Corps out of high school and went over to Iraq, served in Iraq, He was a Marine artillery unit, and from like 1989 to maybe 1993. But I remember when he came back from the Gulf War, and he sat down with me, and I was 11 or 12 years old at the time, and he talked to me about some of his experiences over there and what it was like to be a Marine and all these different things. And I remember thinking, as this 11 or 12-year-old kid, my cousin is the coolest dude ever. And it was just like, he was a hero to me in that moment. I thought, here's a guy who puts on the uniform, he goes and defends our country. And, I grew up in Western Colorado, super patriotic, very blue-blooded place, and had a ton of admiration for him. So then, a few years later, I come back from being a missionary in Brazil in 2000, and 9/11 happens a year later. And my first thought was, back in 1991, back in 1990, when our nation needed people, my cousin signed up, and I was like, now it's my turn. It's 2001. It's 10 years later. I need to sign up. And so I called my cousin. I said, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. And he was, very supportive of me doing that. And so, I signed up, and I hadn't seen my cousin in years and years. But he's like, that's awesome. You should sign up, put the uniform on, go serve. And he is actually a cop in Lubbock, Texas now.
Really?
Him and his son both. And former teammate of mine, a guy named Trey Lindsay, went down and trained the Lubbock SWAT team a couple years back. And my cousin called me. He's like, hey, do you know this guy, Trey Lindsay? And I said, yeah, of course I know him. I went through Green Team with that guy. And so we had a good laugh about that. So he was my inspiration for joining the military after 9/11, and still a guy that I look up to immensely. And he's a cop now, and so shoes on the other foot. And we're going to go down to Midland, and I'm going to invite some of his guys down from Lubbock, and hopefully get a chance to train them and see their tactics and give them a little bit back. So it's a cool thing, coming full circle.
The full circle stuff, man, is so cool. I mean, that's awesome. It's so funny you say that, because when I was a complete screw up in high school. I mean, like, failing every subject in school, had no path. Didn't, in my freshman into sophomore year, didn't even know what the SEALs were. And a Vietnam Marine, who was our teacher for motivational psychology, came into class one day, and he's just this boisterous dude. He's 100 miles an hour. And he's like, ladies and gentlemen, there's only one thing better than the Marine Corps, and that's the U.S. Navy SEALs. And I was like, turned my head. I'm like, what did he just say? Because all he ever talked about was his beloved Corps.
Yeah.
Of course, he makes it sound like SEALs live on the moon and they breathe water and all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I show up after class. I'm like, Mr. Barnes, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And he violently laughs in my face. And he's like, dude, you're not even passing my class, and it's an elective. How the hell are you going to pass SEAL training? And I'm like, I don't know. But it was 9/11 that kicked off for me to actually take it serious. Was blessed enough to make it through the program, and to be able to go back to his class, have a pea coat on in Michigan because it's cold, and to take that off, though, and show him the Trident was like everything for me. So that's awesome, man. I appreciate you sharing that story, because it all comes from somewhere. I didn't just wake up one day and say, I want to be awesome. I, in fact, was trying to do the opposite.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It was not on my radar prior to 9/11 to join the hardest military training program in the world, and then go forward and spend the next 20 years getting myself into firefights and dangerous situations. That was not my thinking as an 18-year-old kid. But the thing that I think is very uniting about all of the guys who came in around that class 242, 243, all the way up through the 250s, is we were really that generation that was motivated by 9/11. Everybody, I remember talking to everybody in our BUDS class, was like, yeah, it came in because of 9/11. It was like a handful of guys that were like, I always wanted to be a SEAL, never wanted to do anything else. But most of the guys were like, yep, 9/11, and I signed up. And that was me too. It was life-changing. And then to get to go through that training, that experience, and then those years in the teams with, guys like you and all the guys from our class that came through, just really something that's indescribable.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a family just waiting for you. And man, is it tight. I had a random question I've never asked before, but I'm also always interested in this. What made you choose East versus West Coast?
Well, the Navy. Because I chose the West Coast and they sent me to the East Coast.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar, back in the day when you graduated BUDS, you used to have a dream sheet they would give you, and it was a list of the 3 teams that you wanted, that you would most like to go to. And so I had family on the West Coast. You know, my family was in Colorado. The rest of my family's in San Jose or Murrieta, Temecula. Had some family in Anaheim. So I'm like, wow, I want to stay here. I want to stay on the West Coast. And so I put down all West Coast teams, 1-3-5, boom. And then we get further on down the road in the end of third phase, and the instructors come back and they're like, all right, well, we got the list of everybody, where everybody's going. So not only did I not go to a West Coast team, I went to an East Coast SDV team. And I spent the first 5 years of my SEAL career diving.
Oh my gosh.
But I guess all's well that ends well, because the epilogue to the story is I lived in Virginia for 22 years. I'm still in Virginia. I've got my house here. The cost of living was much more manageable, I think, here in Virginia than it would have been in California. And it really grew on me. I loved being in the teams out here. I loved getting to do the things that I did, and the career that I had, I think, is a product of the fact that I ended up in Virginia. So everything happens for a reason, right?
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's funny you say that, because another guy that we both went through BUD/S with, Grover, so he went to 7 with me in the same platoon. And sure enough, since he showed up first, we were standing there as new guys, and they had 2 positions open. One was comms and ordnance. And because Grover was senior, we're like, what do you want to go? What do you want? You want ordnance or comms? And he's like, I want ordnance. And they immediately looked at me and said, cool, Parrott, you're ordnance, Grove, you're comms. And he was like, oh, no.
That is the Navy way right there. It's, what do you want? We're going to do the other thing.
Yeah. And I was like, sweet. I just got here and I just got hooked up. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So good times, man. Well, I really appreciate you sharing a little bit of your story. Now, obviously, you have done so much in your career, and we don't really tap into it on this show because we want to talk about post-service, but 22 years of service in the special operations community at a tier 1 level is the gnarliest thing you can do. And, there's an amount of effort that you have put into your career that most in the military, even in the special operations, have never lived up to. And so, as a friend and as a person who knows what you've done, thank you for what you have done for all of us. And you continue to do, because protecting our law enforcement, teaching them the ways to protect us, to take care of my children, that goes farther than anything I learned as a SEAL. And beyond grateful for that, man. So keep doing what you're doing. Community First Project, c1p.org. You can check out Gus on social media. Go follow him on Instagram and LinkedIn, and you can check out Community First Project, which will have all the tags up after this show. Reach out to him to public speak, give a story, talk about how cool he was and how much Birdman failed in BUD/S. Those are some good stories too. And if you can, please find it in your heart to support Community First Project financially, as every dollar goes to helping train law enforcement to protect our communities. So thanks, brother.
That's right. Thank you so much for having me. And like you said, 22 years, really, when I look back, it's just filled with gratitude. It was a great career, and I couldn't imagine having spent the last 22 years surrounded by a better group of people. I learned everything that I learned because it's a very demanding profession surrounded by people who are very driven, and that drove me to be better. So thank you for all of the ways that you've driven me to be better, whether that's in BUD/S or, now post-career. And yeah, just really grateful for the career that we both got to have. Such an amazing group, such an amazing organization, amazing culture.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, bro. You be well.
Thanks, man. You too.
Frogman.